The roots of this scandal go back all the way back to the 1970s, where this kind of behavior has been manifested by the Pakistani community in Britain. But in the 1970s, that community was very, very small, vanishingly small. So it didn't attract nationwide attention. Um, but in 1997, we elected a Labour government under Tony Blair, and he decided that what we would do is ramp up immigration from the tens of thousands to the hundreds of thousands every year. And so we had a net inflow of somewhere between 250 to 350,000 people every year, and a large percentage of those have been Pakistani Muslims. So now Britain is about 5% Muslim, but the uh, distribution of these people is very concentrated in certain urban areas. And what this means is that they have a very insular, tightly knit community that is often quite more interrelated than the normal Western community is. Of course, through consanguineous marriages and uh, essentially cousins marrying cousins through families, and then all arriving in the same area through this network of connections. And this community has a habit, a kind of cultural preference, maybe you could call it, of what is politely called grooming in this country. And that is to target vulnerable young girls and ply them with drugs and alcohol, emotionally abuse them first so you'll what they'll do is they'll take a young girl who has obviously a bad home life, or they'll in many cases attack um, sort of orphanages or various places where children who don't have access to a stable family life have to stay, and make them feel like they belong somewhere. And part of the deal in that relationship is, well, they have to have sex with lots of the men in that community. Uh, this is usually done to underage girls, although it has been done to 18, 17, 18-year-old girls as well. But it can be done to girls as young as like 11, like incredibly young girls who are incredibly vulnerable, and they on the one scale of it can just be raped by the immediate family of the sort of grooming gang. But on the other scale, they are horribly physically abused. On the other side of the scale, they're horribly physically abused. And they are pimped around the country. They are trafficked and pimped to other Muslim majority enclaves in these various cities. And the abuses that you can quite happily go and find lots of reports and inquiries into this, because many have been done, and I've covered many of them myself. And it is just the most humiliating, degrading things that are done to these girls, and so callously. Right? There's no pretense of compassion for these girls. And because this scandal has been going on for such a long time, and it's been identified in 50 different towns and cities in Britain now, uh, pretty much everywhere that this one community has gone, it's been something that the Labour Party, who essentially brought these people in and set up the cultural atmosphere to protect them, to suggest that any criticism of this community was a form of racism, and in fact, it was just your irrational bigotry against people with brown skin that was to play here when you were critiquing this kind of behavior. They have been continuing this ever since it came to light. And it came to light initially in the sort of early 2000s, where you had people like the British National Party, who are, a kind of actual descendant of a Nazi party, first calling alarm tone. But of course, no one wants to hear it. The population of Britain is something like 87%, 90% homogenous native Britain at the time. And so it was just written off as racism. And if it wasn't coming from people who were just kind of essentially avowed racists, maybe it would have been taken more seriously. And then a couple of liberal journalists did, in about 2003, say, hang on, there is actually something to this. But there was a general sort of withdrawing of breath from the subject, as in they didn't get cast out of polite society, but everyone was like, okay, but that's very uncomfortable to talk about at the Westminster dinner party circuit, where the politicians and the media and the quangocracy all hang out with each other. Frankly, they go to each other's houses and have dinner parties and congratulate each other on being so progressive. That didn't play well there because it was very uncomfortable, and because they didn't really care, because it was happening to the working class white girls of North and Middle England, not their problem, not the middle class South. And so this issue was left to fester, and the fish really did rot from the head down in this case. The government, the councils, the social workers, and the police all did everything that they could, and this is very, very well documented, to try and imply that in fact somehow it was the girls that were at fault. And some of the quotes from police officers, and this is going back to like 2006, at the time were just mind-boggling. How they would essentially blame the girls for trying to get these men who were raping them in trouble. And so what we were essentially exposed to was a politically correct cover-up. It would look bad if we were to admit that this was coming predominantly, almost entirely, from one particular community. It would look bad if we admitted that the people in charge were essentially trying to cover it up, and we can go quite deeply into that if you'd like. It would look bad if these girls were just left to twist in the wind. In many cases, they were simply never rescued from their abusers and had to escape on their own. This all looks quite bad. And so in about 2009, 2010, I think it's a little bit earlier than that actually, but you have a working class upsurge against this because it becomes apparent to working class people in the sort of middle and north of England that in fact the powers that be are not on their side on this issue. They've been completely abandoned. They, as far as they're concerned, the powers that be say it's okay for this community to predate on the other community. And so the English Defence League was born. And this was an attempt by lower class men, working class men, who are not politically connected. They have no elite backing. They have nothing behind them other than the truth and a moral imperative. They took to the streets and said, look, we are under attack. We are collectively, our community is under attack from another community. And this group was led by a man called Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who people will otherwise know as Tommy Robinson. And because they were lowbrow, because they were criticizing a newly or mostly newly arrived immigrant non-white community, and because the victims that they were trying to stand by had no connection to the middle class and were generally scorned by them anyway before they'd even become victims, it was very easy for our establishment to turn around and say, no, you're just racists. No, you're just racists. Nothing's happening. There isn't a grooming gang problem. These girls don't have any issues. In fact, the girls themselves are the problem, and you are a racist. And we will, and this is the most effective campaign of defamation I've ever seen, really. They turned Tommy Robinson into a kind of demonic figure for the liberal order. And all of them did this. They are all culpable and complicit in what is effectively a giant cover-up. And now they use him as a kind of totemic racist evil. Now, one might ask, well, give me the quote. Give me the quote. What is the totemic racist thing that he said? And you'll notice it's never provided. They don't have any snippets of Tommy Robinson being excessively racist or abnormally racist or even particularly racist. What they have is a campaign of vibes against him. And at this point, he is a total pariah. He has been targeted by the state. He is a political prisoner, even if in this case, it's not directly related to grooming gangs. It's still related to his relationship with the liberal elite and the judges, the police, the councillors, the MPs, the entire structure is set up to, well, ultimately ruin him. Like the purpose, I mean, he's been bankrupted. right? He has been bankrupted. He's lost his property. He's had to divorce his wife. His entire life has been ruined by these people. He's been deplatformed. He's been debanked. He has been barred from certain towns and cities. He is public enemy number one to these people, and his crime, really, is to expose the flaw in multiculturalism. And this is the 20-year backdrop to what is happening with Elon Musk right now.